right. So we're recording now. Welcome, Jamie Nottingham, to Journeying Deeper Inwards, initial inauguratory, or whatever the word is I'm looking for. Inaugural, whatever the first one is. It's our first one here. We've reformatted from syncretic Qigong and Reiki and gone over to Journeying Deeper Inwards. So the new focus is martial arts practitioners who have a spiritual discipline. I found that when I spoke to, some of these people that have a more focus on energetic cultivation, that a lot of them were not grounded.
Yeah.
And so, I don't really want to speak to the really spacey people out there.
Yeah.
And I'd rather speak to somebody like yourself who is literally out there competing. Congratulations on your win, Jamie.
Thank you.
Must salute you.
Thank you.
So for those who are not aware, you just won the Shuai Jiao Championship. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been doing Shuai Jiao for quite some time now. I started with Lavelle Marshall back when he still lived in New York City.
Okay.
And he kind of was running some stuff with like some Mongolian wrestlers that he had met, and then I was just interested, and I said, hey, let me hop in on one of those, and I went and I met him, and it was a really great experience. And then I trained like one more time with him. We trained together like twice, and he was like, you should just come to this competition with us. And that was back in 2018. So we drove like all the way to Ohio with a whole bunch of guys and competed. I ended up getting third that year. And then in 2019, I went back again after I did slightly more training that time, but Lavelle was kind of like getting ready to move to Inner Mongolia, and he was like sort of in and out of the States. He wasn't always around, so it was a little bit tough to get the consistent training, and sort of like, unfortunately, like as his influence decreased in the training group, the group kind of split up. Like people just didn't really hold together without him there. So it was a little bit hard training that year for it. And then I think I took fourth that year, and then COVID hit, so they didn't have tournaments up until 2023. And then 2023, a whole bunch of guys went, but I like missed the memo, like I just didn't know that there was a competition. I was like, damn, I've always wanted to win that. I gotta get back to it. So then luckily I saw it ahead of time this year, and I had about 3 months to hone in and focus on training for it. And I linked up with Matt Gelfand, who's a really, really good Shuai Jiao guy out of New York City. And we were working together 2 or 3 times every week. And then I was doing Shuai Jiao rounds pretty much every day leading up to it. And I was able to get some really good training in, and then was able to go out there and win the whole thing, which is, that was been my goal since 2018, basically. So I was really happy about that.
That's awesome, man. I mean, it sounds like you had some experience before stepping into that arena. We've talked online about Bagua Zhang and some of these other like internal martial arts that you've studied. So do you feel like the prior experience really fed into your Shuai Jiao, or do you feel like it was a whole new ball game?
Well, so when I first started training with Lavelle, he's like, man, like you have a really solid background. And I had only really done Tai Chi, Bagua Zhang, and some Aikido at that point. I had barely even really started Jiu-Jitsu. I did some other stuff when I was a kid. I did some Taekwondo, I did some Shaolin Kung Fu, but nothing super substantial. So, I think that the background in internal martial arts for me has been really huge, in that learning how to move my body in a way that's sustainable, how to feel the force coming from my opponent, just all of these things that are really emphasized in Tai Chi and Bagua Zhang were really instrumental for me in making the transition to more like combat sport type things. And
Right.
I feel like I've been able to train harder and for longer and with less injuries and in just a more effective way. There's a lot of problems I see now with like my jujitsu students that I just didn't go through. Like people, they'll jack up their shoulders, they jack up their knees, their hip, and like if something happens to me, if I get caught in a bad position, maybe something like that happens. But in general, I'm not hurting my own body myself.
Right.
It's other people are hurting me sometimes, but I'm not hurting myself.
Yeah, and that's important to not fight yourself and to not have stress injuries. There's a lot of
Yeah.
people that have stress injuries. One of my classmates under my Stingy Bagua teacher, he is really heavily into rock climbing, and he's noticed that a lot of the people that just use like pure brute strength, they're having like stress injuries in the rock
Yeah.
climbing. And then when they switch to like a more tendon focused climbing, then the injuries kind of just go away and tend to heal. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's something that, I really struggled with understanding up until very recently, just because like obviously there's a narrative that comes from the traditional arts around what's going on, and then there's like sort of like the modern scientific consensus, and it's very hard to sort of like find the overlap between those. But I was recently reading this textbook by a guy named Franz Bosch, who's he kind of is applying some of this like ecological dynamics and constraints based things, training to weight training and strength and conditioning. And one of
mm,
the things that he really like my it just like blew my eyes wide open was like he's talking about that there's different ways that the structure and the musculature gets used, and that this is you can tell this by the way that the muscles are structured, that there's basically this red tissue that's contractile, and then depending on the muscle there's this long body of it that's white. It's avascular and basically elastic, and that depending on how you utilize the structure and the way that you're generating force, you can either kind of be using this contractile force, which is what I think we tend to think of as being like external or brute strength based kind of force, or you can store and release the elastic component of the tissue, which is something that according to him is really important in good athletics. Like really great athletes, they're using this store and release. And then it immediately made me think of Fajin, internal martial arts, and okay, like I kind of was like, okay, hold on, wait, here goes the Western science actually coming, and saying, yeah, wait, there are different ways to utilize the body. It's not that we're
right.
using no muscle, but that we're using the body in a different way than the way it's like sort of conventionally thought of.
Indeed. And one of the things that I find really interesting is that there's people out there like Coach Chong Xie that are training people like Zhang Wei Li in MMA
Yeah,
in the women's leagues in a very similar fashion.
yeah,
And he broke a lot of it down to focusing on the glute muscles. And so, that pretty much lines up with what I've heard from like Le Habafa people is like you got to get into your butt.
yeah,
So, and I think we're doing the same thing in Bagua and Taiji and Xingyi with our circle walking and our long form and our endless repetitions of these simple movements with like the 5 elements and the 12 animals. We're trying to get as low as possible into our body, right? Like we're
yeah,
trying to have an awareness that is basically below our rib cage. A lot of people I found
yeah,
when I teach Tai Chi, like their breath doesn't really go below their solar plexus.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the whole idea of like sync the chi, right? So uh I think it's there's a lot there that's really important, just from a postural standpoint. If you're supporting the body with the butt muscles, then it's gonna pull the lumbar a little bit straighter, and you basically like what I would talk about is you're opening up Ming Men. So that area on the lower back is gonna open up, and you're gonna have some postural changes that lead to more stability and better force transmission through the body. And I think that sort of opens the gate to utilizing the body in a different way. So you have this basically system of co-contractions. So because the glutes are contracted, the abdominals kick on, and there's like a subtle, like it's weird because we think about it often as relaxation, but there's like a subtle tension across the whole system that basically allows you to react and move a lot faster and more effectively.
Right. And it's interesting that you mentioned that subtle tension that's across the whole system. I don't know if you're familiar with Nassim Raufi from Men in Germany. They have a northern Chinese Men that looks very similar to Xingyi and Bagua in their practice, from what I've seen. And they talk a lot about that song is not relaxation, it's not just release, it's rather dispersion of tension across as wide of an area as possible. And so that
Yeah.
subtle tension is something that's very important, you have to pay attention to. If you're going to be doing something like Tai Chi push hands, they talk about pulling a thread off of your
Yeah.
opponent, right? So you have to find that subtle tension.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Something like Ichuan Bagua, they don't really have the same focus in my experience. Other lines may have a different focus, but what I've trained in the Zhangrang Chao stuff, Bagua and Xingyi, it's really more about like how great can I make myself and then change to what's going on. Not so much, can I subtly pull this thing off of you and then affect a greater change with very little effort. My experience with Xingyi, I just blow people away. And my experience with Bagua is like I try to get behind them and toss them and that sort of thing. So
Yeah, I think it's, there's so there's body mechanics, and between most of those three styles, Xingyi, Bagua, and Tai Chi, the mechanics are pretty similar. They're definitely not the same, but they're pretty similar. And then there's also the issue of tactics in fighting. And if you break it down into the tactics, then the tactics are radically different. Like Tai Chi
right.
aims to stay in the box and, as you sort of said, pull that thread off of them and then redirect the energy. Whereas Xingyi is sort of like an icebreaker. It's like going straight through. It's jamming the opponent, and then Bagua Zhang is looking to go around them. It's sort of a runner's art, and all three are perfectly valid strategies.
Yeah, and the thing that I keep finding on these online discussion groups is people are like, oh well, these other arts are too young in nature. How is that internal? And I'm like, the whole thing with Tai Chi is that it's not just yin, it's also yang.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
if you don't understand where the yang is in your Taiji Chen, you're not really going to get Taiji. You're just going to get this yin floppy art, like
Yeah,
there's.
totally. And I also think there's sort of a double issue there where it's like you have people who are all yin, and that's not Tai Chi, and then you have people who are false yang, and that's also not Tai Chi, right? So it's a very like thin line to be walked, like it's almost like the S curve, right? There's a very narrow place where you're in that Zhongding, you have that unique center line. You're finding that balance point between being yin when you need to be yin, then becoming yang when it's important, but having that yang be grounded, not overreaching. And that's also something that in all martial arts is a huge issue. Is you reach the apex of your attack, and it's very tempting to overreach. It's easy to get greedy and take yourself out of position. You see it in
Yes,
combat sports all the time, just like on a strategic level.
indeed, you do. You see it in such a way that it's really kind of obvious when you look at it in slow mo. Sometimes, like, oh, he stepped right into that knockout punch.
Yep,
Ouch.
yep, exactly.
And these things are often what happens is somebody trains a favorite combo and they can get it to work on their training partner 8 times 9 times out of 10, and they think, oh, I can just go and use my favorite combo out in the ring. I can get it to work with my favorite guy like all the time. When I go to throw this at the guy, he's never going to know what's hit it. And you know what, if you're paying attention, you can probably interrupt that and step in and interrupt the pattern. That
Yeah, that's a
Xingyi
big
sort of
issue
mindset.
with the training method. The majority of martial arts and combat sports a lot of times are approached in this very information processing based way, and people are really centered around techniques, and combinations and those type of things, when really what they need to be learning how to do is be present and respond to what's happening in the environment and the affordances that are being given by the opponent or the fighting scenario that you're in. And training techniques is basically antithetical to that. You train techniques, you're going to end up trying to impose your idea of what you want to happen on a situation. It's almost like imagination. You can't do that. You're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble when somebody's good and they're actually responding to what you're affording them, because every movement you makes has things that it affords your opponent. So you have to understand that and basically be able to quickly and without really thinking, assess the risk reward of a particular movement in a particular situation. That only comes through experience.
Right. Experience and training with somebody who can kind of show you that. You can't just
Yeah,
learn that. It's not something you can easily get
you
to.
could learn it really slowly on your own, but you're gonna make radical leaps in progress if you have somebody experienced, a coach or a guide who's sort of showing you the ins and outs of what their experience has got to them. I mean, you could just see so much further, right, when you stand on the shoulders of somebody else. It's gonna help progress so much.
Or if they've already gone up that mountain path, right? It's a
Yeah,
lot faster having a guide. Then okay,
yeah.
I got to blaze a whole new trail up the mountain. If you got somebody that already went up that way, like, hey, just come with me. It's right up here.
Yeah, and you also
So
there's always the risk of getting sort of caught in something that appears to be rewarding, or it's going to lead to a good outcome, but it's sort of like a little bit illusory, so the teacher really gets you around that.
yeah, yeah, and it's really easy to get caught up in like striking the air or a bag or a tree or something like that, and not having an intelligent opponent there.
Yeah.
These sorts of things are just training methods. They're not meant to be, actual substitutes for a partner.
Yeah, absolutely.
So speaking about presence and being able to recognize the affordances around you, one of the things that you and I kind of connected on initially on Instagram was Tibetan Buddhism. And I've
Yeah.
been following your online presence, and I'm a Dudyam Tersa or a Nyingma Tibetan Buddhist. I go to Pema Osaling here in Santa Cruz, California, for our retreats and stuff there, and I work with Pema Rigzin for his other events outside of the retreat center as well. So, how do you find these Buddhist cultivation methods inform your presence within your competitive formats?
There's kind of like, I guess, a bit of like a double-edged sword there. I mean, on the one hand, I feel like uh, it it definitely offers training for the mind and the body, especially since I've gotten more involved with like Tumo and Salung and those types of practices. I noticed a big difference in my martial arts. I mean, I would say that the most influential thing martial arts wise would probably, like, from the beginning, would be just shamatha training, just being able to actually still the mind. I mean, I'm a big fan of like uh, Pali canon style, just jhana work, like just working on concentration, trying to enter jhana, trying to abide in the jhana. That type of stuff I think is really, really productive, regardless of what other practices you're doing. Like, it just pretty much gives you the ability to concentrate in a way that's really, really powerful. It's going to increase the raw processing power of your mind, and I feel like that's been really helpful in everything that I do. But from a specifically Tibetan Buddhist standpoint, I think that Anu yoga practices have the most crossover. So when you're practicing, Tumo, six yogas of Naropa, Salung, that stuff, it when you start to get into the body, it's really, really transformative. The vase breathing, we were talking about getting below the diaphragm, and I think that doing the vase breath and those types of practices is really, really powerful for opening that up. Like, I had some experience with some advanced qigong, like doing reverse breathing and those types of things that I learned from my teacher towards the end of our time together. But the level of detail and the information and the subtleties that I've been able to learn while studying the vase breathing and tumo really started to transform my body and bring everything down. So I think those practices are really, really valuable, both from a mental standpoint, being able to maintain your focus, being able to be rooted, being able to be grounded, but also physically in finding, your dantian, so to speak, or your hara, and learning how to manipulate the body from that central axis, the salong and lujong have been really, really helpful with that.
Mm. Thank you. Most people may not be familiar with some of the Tibetan terms you just used here. So to clarify a little bit, Tamo is like, or Tumo, however it's said. I'm not a Tibetan speaker. I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to learn it, but I'm not very good at it. So it's a heating, an inner fire practice, right?
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
And then Salung is kind of like yoga, right? Like we would think of
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. It's sort of like the hatha yoga. It's kind of hard to describe. It's very active and fast. It probably the closest thing to it in hatha yoga are like some of the, not shat karmas, like cleansing action kriyas, but like the movement kriyas where you're going between two postures. Chandali, as a practice from hatha yoga, is the same as tumo. They're if
Okay.
you, when they talk about tumo in Sanskrit, they call chandali. So these practices are paralleled in some forms of hatha yoga, but there's a unique Tibetan interpretation and development of them. So there's a lot of similarities between like traditional hatha yoga. It's complicated historically because the yoga that we practice now in the West has a strong influence from Western gymnastics. And
Right.
truthfully,
That
there's
was
nothing
the
wrong with that.
Swedish guy, right?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I can't remember the name of the scholar, but he pretty much broke it down pretty effectively. But there's
And a
just
lot of
this
our qigong in the Chinese systems is heavily
same
influenced
thing.
by that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And truthfully, in my from my perspective, there's nothing wrong with that. Like movement is movement, and it's great. But when you're looking to achieve specific like psycho-spiritual goals with the movement, and you're looking to get into the internal side of it, where you're opening and closing points, you're moving along the channel lines, you want to know which practice you're doing. Are we stretching and tensioning and conditioning the external body, or are we moving along the channels and opening and closing points? Like, what's the intention behind this movement, and where does it come from? So the older, like, Nath, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, Garanda Samhita, the stuff that's a little bit older, as opposed to the things coming down from Krishnamacharya, are more similar to the Tibetan Salung, but still not the same, because again, the Tibetans had a unique interpretation of it.
Interesting. Well, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate the information for our viewers and listeners, in case you're not actually watching this. So basically, the idea is that all of these different movement practices are mutually informative, right? We all have a human body.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And getting to know your physical body and having a supple and strong physical body in many ways is a very valid precursor to some of this deeper work. I think a big mistake people make sort of on both sides of the aisle is they're either all about conditioning just the physical body, and they have very little understanding of the subtle layer, or they're solely focused on the subtle to the exclusion of the health of their physical body. And I think that these are all sort of errors in practice that you could fall into, that we sort of have our preferences, but that you want to be balanced on all levels, and that's important for health, and it also allows you to do the practices better. The psychological level is another like aspect. Like a lot of people are so resistant to just going to therapy, or doing some psychological work, but it's only going to free up energy to do the other stuff. Like it's going to
Right.
allow you to be better in those other realms. So like I think every sphere is important, and we want to be balanced across all those.
And if we're going to be teachers, it's really important that we do that work for ourselves. I
Yeah.
had a Sifu that was just really traumatized. He lost a daughter in a traffic accident, and he got into a bicycle accident and was paralyzed from the waist down, and he just did not do the work necessary to deal with that stuff. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
he would come to class and put us through it. He'd get us in Janzhong and then get on the phone and think it was funny,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
totally.
it's like, dude, we're dying here. Can you please like stop talking to your friend and like get back to our time? Like, this is so rude,
Yeah, no, it's a common thing. I think it's actually like it's a bit of like an endemic issue with martial arts, is the psychological imbalances. I think it from like a almost like a Adlerian standpoint. He's a psychologist. He was kind of contemporaries with Jung. Um, and they were all in that psychoanalysis school with they Jung, Freud, and Adler all had their own opinions on things. Freud probably being the least realistic out of the three of them. But one of the really good things I got from Adler was about compensation, and a lot of human behavior comes from compensating for our weakness or our vulnerabilities, and you see this all the time in martial arts. Is people basically have, mostly men, have insecurities around various things, and they seek out martial arts as a way to build themselves up and make themselves invincible, so that they can cover up those insecurities, which it can either be a jumping off point for healing those things, or it can be really bad, and it ends up that you never deal with that stuff, and you're basically basing your personality off of this compensation. And I think that that's where you get into those kind of trouble with those types of personalities like you're talking about.
Indeed. And my very first Taiji teacher, he was a good friend of mine. He always told me, hey, don't call me Sifu, don't call me your Sifu, your dad, the teacher.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not me. He's like, I'm
Yeah.
your friend. He's like, we're
Yeah.
friends. Like,
Yep.
like I'm teaching you this to help you. I'm not teaching you this to be your dad.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's important.
and not only that, he had his own issues, but a lot of it was compensatory. What he was doing, the dude was 4'10", and he
Yeah.
was 110 stopping wet, so he
Yeah.
knew like 3 or 4 martial arts just because
Yep.
he'd been attacked, in
Yes.
his past. And he had also been involved in cartels when he lived in Mexico, where he grew
Yeah.
up. So he
Yep.
had a very good idea as to what kind of violence he could experience in this life as a very small person. Believe me,
Yeah.
he had a 45 caliber on his hip at all times in Arizona
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
And so it's like, dude, like, we're not in that dangerous of a place. I get you have a history and stuff, but
Yeah.
we're not there anymore.
Yep.
And so like, when his whole personal life melted down, and I had to go in and help clean up some of that stuff and help his family relocate, because I felt this debt to him as a friend, and he helped me with this movement practice to help me recover and stuff. I found out a lot about his personal life that I found really unfortunate. I was like, man, you could have just been honest with us about this. Like, we didn't have to have this nuclear meltdown and have to come
Yes.
and clean up all the pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Like, we
totally.
could have been prepared. Like,
Yeah,
we
and
knew
I
you
think
were
it's
doing
tough.
some stuff, but
all these things, you have movement practices, you have martial arts, you have spiritual practices. I feel like they all can be helpful with dealing with that stuff, but they're not geared towards it. So it's really important to also do things that are directly to address that. You have to do basically like psychological self work, and I think some of that stuff is just we often get into using other things to sort of patch it over, as opposed to just going right to the field that's aimed at those issues. And I think that's a
right.
big mistake we make as spiritual practitioners, as martial artists, like whatever it is. these other modalities, they have value and they are great, but we have to make sure we're, using the right medicine for the right disease.
Indeed, indeed. And these recovery methods that we learn, sometimes they can be incredibly effective, but they're not always the safest, right? So
Yes.
I'm a
Yeah,
stroke
yeah,
survivor, right? I have
yeah.
to take an antidepressant to have enough certain chemicals in my brain to even just like get through my day, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes what happens is you see these like, social media influencers out there and they're like, I drank quinine and this and that and the other,
Yeah.
and now I'm doing, so much better. And it's like, quinine's an anti-malarial drug. It has drug interactions with like 300 different drugs, but you're not telling anybody, hey, look at this drug list and be safe out there.
100%. No, 100%. And even with like, there's spiritual practices that are really valuable, right? Like, but at the same time, like you said, there can be an issue with uh either dragon sickness, or sometimes they'll like have a like wind in the heart channel, right? This idea that the energy needs to be grounded and the subtle sensations are rising up in the body, going to the head and basically causing psychosis. They
Yeah,
cause mania.
I
And this is
experienced
a
that
huge
actually.
issue. No, yeah, yeah, I've definitely experienced it as well.
It's
It
awful.
is an issue in those practices.
Yeah, it's awful. I had to find somebody that was basically a llama to fix me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of people who actually specialize in dealing with that type of thing, because in some of these, like, and this is what I was saying about the double-edged sword with the spirituality and the martial arts. It's like everything is its own pursuit. So, sometimes I really feel like the spiritual practice benefits the martial arts. Other times I feel like my martial arts takes away from my ability to do as much spiritual practice as I feel like would be ideal, right? But then there's also this issue of, you go really deep into spiritual practice, and people have these issues even on 10-day Vipassana retreats, that you start to have psychological symptoms.
Mhm.
It can be bad for your body and mind when your goal is like, there's a really good book called Facing the Dragon, dealing with like personal and spiritual grandiosity,
Mhm.
that I really like. I think it's by Masters. Um, and it goes into this idea that, like, there's a whole category of people who are basically spiritual athletes. Like, your goal is to have spiritual achievements. You're looking to do longer and longer retreats. You're looking
Right. So
to go
somebody
deeper
like
and deeper.
Delson Armstrong out there in the wider world, the guy that does Nirodha Samapati to the point where he can go into complete cessation for a week and they can study him with MRIs and all kinds of stuff like that.
Yes.
But he
Yeah.
has no personal life. He doesn't have a wife. He
Yes.
doesn't have kids. He
Yes.
doesn't really even have, anything else going on.
Yeah, exactly. So you see that, like, if somebody's doing, when you get to a certain level of spiritual practice, just like when you get to a certain level of martial arts, it's going to cut into other aspects of your life and your experience. So, you have to ask yourself sort of these deeper questions. And I think this is one reason why I'm drawn to Tibetan Buddhism is, you have this sort of model of the Mahasiddha, where it's like, they had an ordinary life, and within the ordinary life they were able to achieve, right? So it's
Yes.
the martial arts, right? Maybe you could say, is like my personal vehicle of practice. So I try to weave the spirituality together with my martial arts in such a way that it becomes a vehicle for practice in a tantric way, as opposed to if I was practicing in a more like not to say there's anything bad about it, but in like a lesser vehicle, like a Hinayana scope, that it would just be an obstacle. That the martial arts and family life and all those things, they would just be obstacles. Whereas in Tantra, there are things that can be taken with you onto the path. So it's one of the reasons why I think I settled on the Tibetan tradition as opposed to something else.
I agree. I'm in the same opinion myself, and not just taken with you on the path, but used as something to further you along the path.
Yes.
Like we have children's retreats
Yeah.
at my Sangha in the summer. Like I could take my 7-year-old to the children's retreat. Probably going to happen next year, not this one because he's got some
Yeah.
behavior issues we're working through. But that's one of the things that I looked at. I'm like, I have 2 kids. You know, I can't just abandon my family and go off into a monastery in Thailand or in the middle of the forest and disappear. You know, and Tibetan Buddhism, you can take everything with you. I mean, you know, like they serve whiskey at Suck. You know, like you don't really. I don't drink anymore because my medication. There's interactions. It's fine. You know, I chose to do something else. But you know, like if I wanted to, it's there, right? Like I don't have to worry about it. You know.
Exactly.
And so that's one of the other things too, is like just about every aspect of life can be transformed or appreciated or shifted in perspective in Tantra, whereas with some of these other traditions like Theravada or Mahayana, there's certain things that are just not really, you know, taken with you. And you know, that's one of the things I appreciate about some of the older Taoist stories as well. You know, you have these like walking the powder practices where, I mean, these people are basically snorting up what we would say is modern day Coke. You know, back then it was like 5 mineral powder or whatever, you know, and then they would go on 2-mile walks. You know, it's like, yeah, I got real high and I took a long walk. It was great. And I used my meditation practice, you know, and so this is one of the things that, you know, we don't really know how to properly focus on and how to properly fit within our lives, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people get addicted, they get attached to something. Oh, I need to have this throughout my day. And it's like, okay, well, you know, is it really something you need? You know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, you know, it's like to me, the way I look at it is that there's sort of been a process of development. I think we like, you know, there's a tendency in spirituality to always like look back, and it's like, well, whatever they were doing 6,000 years ago must have been the best. And that's not really my my take on it. The way that I kind of look at it is that, like, as humans, we've been undergoing sort of like a spiritual development, right? And as you go through history, when you reach, you know, about the early to middle ages, what ends up happening is that you have this development of alchemy in China and tantra in India, and that development, to me, is the key to it, is that there was the beginning of trying to integrate our knowledge of the world with spiritual knowledge, so that instead of having these be mutually exclusive domains, that we're actually sort of starting to tie these things together and say, well, how can medicine be relevant to spirituality? How can psychology, how can our understanding of our minds and what humans do and what makes a healthy human, how can that be relevant to spirituality? And I would hope to see that as we go deeper with science and deeper with medicine, and hopefully maybe get it away from being so monetized, because the profitability margins aren't always the best things for good science and good medicine, that we could see an even deeper integration of spiritual work and these practices into medicine, into psychology, to the point that, you know, sort of like the idea behind Tantra, that it's a weaving, it's a web, right? That you could weave these strands together into body-mind practices that would be even more skillful and more beneficial. And I think you see some things that are going this way. Some of the experimentation that's been done on meditators, Dr. Nita is a huge force in the world, I think, in this regard, and that he's
as well as
really,
Shinzen Young. I don't know if you're familiar with the stuff he's done at University of Arizona. I think with like the Sonography Institute, like they're using ultrasound, I believe.
Yep.
So yeah, it's amazing what's going on. I believe Guru Viking just put a interview up with one of Dr. Nida's students, Caroline Van Dam, and the psychiatrist in Bhutan. I believe he's the only psychiatrist there. That just got up today. And you know, so this sort of thing is really exciting to me, seeing that these two Western and Eastern things are coming together through Tibetan medicine. You know, a lot of people don't understand that Tibetan medicine is very much a syncretic medical tradition. It draws from Greek, Persian, Chinese, and Indian influences and tries to
Yep.
tie them all together. And so there are aspects of Tibetan medicine schools very similar to Chinese medicine schools, where there's kind of like a, like maybe a traditional Chinese medicine theory, but then each of these, families might have something that they preserve specifically.
Yeah. And then also getting into differential diagnosis, where it's like, okay, we call it this in Tibetan medicine. What's it called in Chinese medicine? What's it called in Western medicine? How do we take these different conditions and look at them across the board and really try to figure out what's going on with the body?
Yeah, and it's not just the body, right? Like if we look at like the tripartite theory of the body, like say Chinese medicine, you have like Jing, Qi, Shen. So you have your
Yeah.
vital essence, like something that's more physical, and then your Qi, which is like more emotional, and Shen, which is more spiritual. So like there's 3 different levels that you can diagnose things on. And so, there's different channels that associate to those things, So like you have your muscle tendon channels that are a little bit more physical, and then you have the energetic channels for the organs, which are less physical, and then you have the extraordinary meridians that are even less physical than that. And each of those is equivalent to its own Dantian, basically.
Yeah.
So if we really go through, like these different perspectives on the body, we can see that not everything is necessarily conflicting. It's just a matter of understanding what it is they're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. What are they referring to? And I think that's something tricky. Even like we were talking about the internal martial arts, it's like, in Tai Chi, they say relax 100%. And then you get the critic who says, well, if you relax 100%, you'll fall down. And it's like, well, it's an instruction. Okay. It's saying without falling on the floor, relax everything in your body as much as you possibly can. So there's a difference between the instructions and if we were to dissect the person or scan them, what's actually going on, from a physical standpoint, and it's important to understand that distinction.
Well, that's almost like an autistic literalism. I mean, come on, guys. Like
that's what the comment section brings out in people.
yeah, and a lot of times you don't get the most intelligent people commenting. They may not have a wide experience, and that's an issue too. Like they might have one angle that they see everything from, and they can't shift over to your side, which is really hard. It's like, hey, can you look at it from over here for just a moment?
Just
what about
a second. I
know you like this.
I think those people are what I kind of have come to realize is that they don't have very much practice outside of commenting on things. That their practice for the most part is typing on a keyboard. And that's part of the reason why they're so defensive, is they feel attacked by anything that, is sort of encouraging them to like get off the keyboard and go do something.
Right, go join a school, bud.
Yeah. And they're like, no way, that's crazy. I'll never do that. Nobody knows what they're doing. And it's like, well, what are you doing? Right.
And that's the thing, is like, how do you know what you're doing if you've never had anybody touch you with this? That's the thing. I've had a teacher reach in and pull one of my floating ribs down. I'm like, oh God, I'm dying. Like that's what Bagua is for some people. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff you can experience by actually doing some of this stuff is, it's hard to believe. So I think, if you didn't have any experience of it, you never met somebody who was really high level, you wouldn't believe it. And I don't even really blame people for that, because, I come from a external martial arts background too. I do a lot of, hard fighting, but there's some stuff that my Tai Chi teacher had done to me that, like, it was just, I still don't really understand what happened. I have rationalizations, explanations for it, but it's just beyond anything that that could really be explained with the current models I have. Same thing with Tibetan Buddhism. I mean, I've been a part of empowerments where they're doing the condensed empowerment, and they say, the deity's form starts falling like snowflakes, and as soon as they say snowflakes, a torrential rain starts. And then I leave the temple, and somebody wasn't at the empowerment and they were in town. I say, hey, did you see that rainstorm? They're like, no. there was no rain here. It was like, oh yeah, it just rained over the monastery while they were doing that part. Like, it's like, okay, like something's going on here.
Right, right. Okay, so I'm gonna get a little bit closer to the camera. So I am a TBI survivor. So there's a point right here where I have this like wicked bone scar that basically goes like from my face, like my hairline kind of changes a bit right there. And so I was in an Avalokiteshvara Korva Tongtrug empowerment. And no joke, the next day, this giant bright red and yellow triangle of like bone scar tissue came out of that spot on my forehead. I just pulled it out. It was about this big. And oh, that hurt. It bled a hell of a lot. But after that, I have basically never had a migraine again.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you know, it's a pretty amazing thing. You know, I've been working with Pemorixin. I don't have food allergies anymore. I still have environmental allergies, but, you know, I'm working through that. I got allergy shots coming up here in a moment. So, you know, that's one of the things I really appreciate about the Tibetan tradition is they say, hey, I work in a hospital. Go get Western medicine, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm a chaplain at a hospital. Like I have to go in and sanitize my hands just like everybody else that works there, you know?
Yeah.
Essence of Utah Yingtig right here, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot, like that's like exactly what I was talking about before, is like, you know, you have to be grounded and understand what's the value of each thing. You know, there can be really powerful healing benefits of, say, you know, participating in spirituality, but that's not always what the person needs. So you have to approach these things on all levels. You know, you have to do your allergy shots, and then also, you know, do the whatever, you know, Tibetan medicine or Soa Rigpa
Right.
you know, treatments you're getting, and eventually you're going to find a balance that's working and is effective.
Right. Come in for your vitality hooking, you know, your
Yes.
longevity hooking. Come in for
Yeah.
all of those little rituals. You know, no joke. I went to a Lotsaguk last summer and I sat down and did a Reiki meditation about 2 weeks after that. And it was like I was traveling in a tunnel and I saw a Naga. He had a piece of my law. I was just like, oh, hey, how's it going? What kind of guy are you? You know, like not like he was scared out of his gourd because he knew I could smite him for having that piece of me. But you know, it was just a weird experience, and he was completely kind of taken aback that I wasn't upset about it. You know, he's like, what? I was like, hey, yeah, nice to see you. You're kind of weird looking. Hey, have a great one. Bye. Thanks for giving me this back.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And you know, the more syncretic practice you do, a lot of times you're going to have elements from one thing entering into another. And I think that's also an area where like, you know, Jung is really helpful, because you can start to understand like, hey, what am I interacting with here? Where is this coming from, you know, and start to say, oh, look, you know, there's these archetypes and these fit certain things, and the practices start to fit together. Western occultism also is really helpful to me in that regard, like the using like hermetic stuff where they'll look at the tree of life and start to break down basically what are these forms, what type of energy is behind each of these forms of a deity. And then you can start to say, oh, this is a particular energy that exists in the universe and it's manifesting in this form, you know, and that has helped me a lot too, to understand what's behind some of these practices.
Have you been following Justin Sledge's podcast, Secret History of Western Esotericism?
No, I'll have to check that out.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's totally accessible. He's a PhD and he's very committed to making things free. And it's all on YouTube. He was just on Guru Viking recently too. So I love his channel. He's got a lot of really great Western alchemy information on there. I'm not really, you know, like I'm one of those people, I can't spread myself too thin, you know. And so I kind of focus in on certain things, and so, you know, like I listen to that stuff, but I don't really actively go and seek out Western alchemical knowledge, because I feel like the Tibetan and Chinese stuff is a big enough challenge as it is.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, and it's worthy of my time. You know,
absolutely.
And so that's the thing is, you know, I only have so much time. I have a 5-month-old daughter almost. I have a 7-year-old kid almost. He's great. And I have a fiance and a family, and I live in Northern California, which is beautiful, you know. So I like to go outside now.
Yeah, I think it's also like there's an accessibility thing. So what's happened with me in terms of martial arts and spirituality is I've always gone with the teacher that I felt like was the most experienced, that I had the best access to at the time. So where you are, there's actually a lot of really great Tibetan Buddhist stuff going on. So
Yes.
it's very accessible. So I can't say exactly, but I think if I lived in California and I had access to those teachings, man, I would be all over that.
Yeah, I mean, I can drive about 2.5 hours to the Bay Area, and there's
Yeah,
like 3 to 6 Didyam Tersar stuff going on every month at least.
exactly. Yeah.
And out here there's no Didyam Tersar, but there is a Gelugpa Tibetan Buddhist center, and there's also a Shingon Buddhist center here
Oh, that's cool.
for Japanese Vajrayana.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so it's not like I'm spoiled. I'm kind of spoiled for choice, actually. I'm not out here desperate. And so that was actually, I relocated back here from Phoenix because my family is out here and my Sangha is out here. There's no Didyam Tersar in Arizona.
Yeah.
And so that's my primary thing is I chose to go Didyam Tersar because I got a treasure vase, and I was like, okay, how do I work with this thing? Come to find out, it's like 5 steps down the path that I hadn't even started on yet. So it's like, all right, I got to catch up to where this vase is.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because like I've been studying this constraints-led approach and ecological dynamics, mostly to help with jujitsu and my jujitsu coaching. But one place I've been really starting to understand its application too is with meditation. And there's this notion that like we need to start at the beginning, and I think it's actually in some ways counterproductive that you want to start almost with the end. That starting with understanding what the goal of these practices is, like if your goal was more prosperity and then you get a treasure vase, then that's the perfect entry point. Or if your goal is longevity and you participate in longevity practices, that's perfect because you're getting to see the result. You're getting to see that end point, and then what you're training for all along the way. So,
Right.
there's some teachers now who are, and this isn't as non-traditional as people might think it is, but they're really like almost starting people with Dzogchen or Ati Yoga or Mahamudra. They're introducing you into the nature of the mind first, which is the goal, is enlightenment, right? And then having you do all the rest of the practices from that standpoint. And I think there's incredible value in that because you actually understand what you're training for. It's sort of the equivalent of allowing beginners to do some live training in martial arts. It's like, hey, we're going to show you what fighting is like. We're not going to let you get hurt, but we're going to actually show you what this thing is like. And then you not only get a glimpse of the end point, but you also get to really experience your own ignorance. You're like, wow, like I can't do this.
Right.
I need help doing this. Oh, well then here are these auxiliary practices that are going to support you and develop you to the point where you will be able to do this. And then you're like, wow, thank you. As opposed to I have to do Nundro first, like there's a big difference in the attitude when you have the experience.
And also, one of the things I wanted to bring up about Nundro is a lot of times it's not formatted well.
Yeah.
It's not really formatted for the Western mindset to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and go through these steps to learn these things in a manner. They kind of throw it all at you at once and expect you to just kind of get it. Like, okay, this is your practice now, and you're doing, I don't know, a refuge tree above your head and all this other visualization that can be extremely difficult.
Yeah.
And you may want to do something like shamatha first.
Yeah, 100%. I would. I mean, I think that doing some basic shamatha is huge. It's going to enable you to be able to do that visualization. Most Westerners don't have the strength of concentration or visualization. I for sure didn't until extensive shamatha training. And then it's weird because so when I started my meditation training, I started with like Theravada style Buddhism, and we were doing four immeasurable minds. So I did like two four immeasurable minds retreats before I ever started doing Nundro. And then when I started doing the Nundro, at the very end, we quickly, like in like a sentence, read through these four immeasurable minds as like as aspirations. You know, like may all beings be happy, may all beings be free from suffering. You know, it was like really, really quick. And I'm like, hold on. I'm like, man, if I hadn't done 4 hours a day of these meditations in retreat for 3 weeks, I wouldn't be able to just read through this and have it be meaningful. So,
Right.
you know, I think that some of these basic trainings are really, really, really important if you want to progress with the more complicated ritualized style of practice.
I agree. Additionally, I would say something that is like non-sectarian is also really important in the beginning. I really appreciate one of Shinzen Young's students put together unified mindfulness. That is excellent
Yeah,
for shamatha and vipassana, and going through that process. I mean, there's very little better than that as far as something that's approachable for a Western. There's no
absolutely.
Buddhist jargon at all.
Yeah, no, I think, and that's a really it's a really valuable thing. And then sometimes things like that can, if they're a little bit decontextualized, it brings people in who otherwise wouldn't be comfortable. And then by the end of the training, most people want to find out more about the context anyways. You know, they become curious. Hey, where did this come from? And they're able to look deeper into it and to study it.
Right, right. And one of the things that I really appreciate about Alex Cosma is that he um, put together that Buddhist Neigong course, and he introduced something that he calls the Sentinel, which is a little different. And excuse me, I had a hiccup. Basically, he talks about having like a judge or a sentinel in your thought stream, so you're not just paying attention to what's there and what's passing and that sort of thing, but you can have something that brings up, like let's say something terrible comes up, and your brain is like, yes, we're going to go forth and conquer the world, and we shall be the next conqueror, the Alexander, and so you have a sentinel in there, right? It's like, this is kind of bullshit. We don't want this in here. Get it out. And
Yeah,
so that was a very valuable addition to something like unified mindfulness, is having this Buddhist contextualization reintroduced, like, hey, there's actually a moral code to this
yeah,
path.
yeah.
Not only is there a moral code, you have a duty to actively remove these things from your psyche.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And so that informs things a little bit more, so it's just a matter of finding the path that you really want to go on. And one of the things that's really helpful for like those four measurables that you were talking about a moment ago is something like a green Tara or Avalokiteshvara practice.
Yes. Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah. Chen Razik is Avalokiteshvara is really powerful in generating those. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of times, we have practices like in the Didyam Tursar, you'll hear somebody say, "Oh, I didn't start on Nundro right away. I started on Vajrakilaya to eliminate obstacles and gain some concentration." Or I started on Green Terra to focus on compassion for all beings, including women, because I'm kind
Yeah.
of sexist or whatever.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, so it just depends on what they think is appropriate for you, right?
Yeah, totally. I think there's this wide range of practices, and that it has to be applied sort of like medicine, that you have specific hang-ups, specific defilements in your mind stream, and that you want to be very judicious about picking which practice is going to help you to eliminate those and work with it skillfully, because there might be something that it isn't the right thing, and it's not going to give you the leverage you want on whatever it is you're working on, and something else might be much more effective. It's just like martial arts. It's like we are talking earlier about affordances, right? There, each mind is going to afford you certain things, and you want to understand, hey, this is what my mind is affording me. This is the practice that's going to give me the most skill, that's going to be the most skillful for ripening my mind stream, whereas these other practices may not be. And again, just like with martial arts, teacher is huge in that. You need
Yes.
somebody skillful, more skillful than yourself, to help you make those decisions, because it's not always as it appears. In fact, it's usually not.
Right. Yeah, and you know that's one of the things I've talked to a number of my mentors and teachers and therapists about through the years is like, you know, when I get to a place, because I know that eventually it's going to be a point where you say, hey, it's okay for you to teach. I'm like, okay, so what are the things that you do to manage yourself? You know,
Yeah.
I understand you have this whole path that you've given me, but what is your practice like? You know, what is it that you're working on? Like, if I hadn't worked for Tim White in a career setting, so he was like my boss, and he was also my meditation teacher for Bagua Neigong and some Buddhist meditations and Taoist meditations. If I hadn't seen that in a very grounded manner, like his behavior, the guy that we worked with who owned the company, the dude was bipolar. He was manic half the time, and he just could not really function. And if I had not seen Tim deal with this guy like it's just water off a duck's back, like, oh, somebody splashed nearby, cool, I'm in the pond. You know, it was really difficult for me personally at the time to deal with that guy. I couldn't. We were not compatible to work with each other. But Tim could work with the guy like, oh, no big deal. It is what it is, right? I wasn't developed enough to be able to handle that guy, but some people are, and I wasn't there yet. And seeing that as an example was very inspiring, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where, like, you know, like you end up with some of the spiritual types who aren't super grounded. I think that's where it kind of goes wrong, is like, you want to see the results of your practice. There should be changes to your pliability, your flexibility, your ability to handle these things. And when you're not getting those results, then we know, okay, hey, we need to make some adjustments, in either in volume or frequency or the type of practice, in order to make sure that we're actually making progress on getting a mind that's supple and kind, and able to deal with various changes and obstacles.
Yes, yes. And, you know, I totally agree with that. A lot of it is flexibility of mind, right? If you can't really change how you think, you're not really going to be able to change your body very much if you need to switch between mindsets in order to switch your body, right?
Yeah. And I think that's sort of like the art of Bagua right there, is understanding how to change the mind, how to change the body, understanding what is change, what are the factors that cause and shape change. You know, I think that's one of the beauties about Baguazhang as an art.
Yeah, I love it. It's my primary art, actually. I love Xingyi, I love Tai Chi, a lot less than I love Bagua. You know, it's my favorite kid of all the arts that I have. And you know, I did Aikido as a kid, and I find that it's so informative between the two styles.
Yeah.
It's very fun to do both.
Yeah, I've heard some rumors that O-sensei maybe was exposed to some Baguazhang, and that's actually what prompted some of his development of Aikido.
Yeah, I've seen that written out there. I don't personally agree from what I've looked into, because it looks like his teacher, Takeda Sakaku, just created the art whole cloth. So historically, you know, it looks like it was just something that was made, including a lot of esoteric Taoist theory. So
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
yeah. But you know, he did spend time in Inner Mongolia, so maybe he got some Shuai Jiao experience, right? Who knows?
Yeah, it's certainly possible.
What I wanted to bring up next, considering how much we've been talking already, Jamie, and our time's kind of going here, is your instruction offerings and your commitment to accessibility. I know you have a Patreon out there.
Yeah. So you know, one thing I sort of believe in these arts is that, like, I want the stuff that I do and teach to be very accessible and available to people. I feel like, if you have the money to pay, quote unquote, full price for it, and you want to really compensate me for the time and the money that I've spent learning these things, then go ahead, buy private lessons that are expensive. But if somebody can't afford that and they want to learn, then I'm always, interested in trying to accommodate that and make it possible. I just think that, there's so many people who come from varying socioeconomic backgrounds, and they don't necessarily have the ability to access teachings the way that they want to. So I'm always more than happy to share what I know, and when it comes to the limits of that, to try to put people in contact with other people that they can learn more from. So that's like a really big part of what I do, and something that I'm definitely committed to, is just making sure that these things are accessible, almost to the point that sometimes I get a bit taken advantage of by people who probably have enough money to pay for stuff but are just kind of being cheap. But I'd rather that be the case, and sort of catch the people who otherwise couldn't really pay full price, than the other way around, and make it prohibitively expensive, and miss out on the people who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it. And yeah.
So between the Patreon and the private lessons, do you have like a weekly group that you have locally, or is that just private available right now?
So I teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu pretty much 7 days a week right now.
Okay.
In a school, and then I'll do lessons on top of that. And then with the Patreon, I basically just keep a record of all of the techniques that I'm teaching, anything I'm working on, and and that could range from meditation to Chinese martial arts, Aikido, Shuai Jiao, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. It could pretty much be anything in the realm that I'm working on. There's even a section of like book recommendations. Most of the book recommendations are free because anytime I'm referring people out to buy something else, I usually just make it free because it's basically not my own content anyways. Um, so my Patreon's $5 a month, just because, again, I want people to be able to access that type of stuff and not have the cost be a barrier. But there's over like 300 posts on there of all varying topics that are available to people. And with the lessons, I do a variety of things. I've worked on people with movement and like injury type stuff. We've also done lots of Aikido. A lot of people are interested in the specifics of applying Aikido to fighting, and then also a lot of jujitsu. The jujitsu stuff is definitely in high demand.
I bet it's such a great toolkit to have if you're ever going to be in an MMA environment, or fight somebody that has that toolkit already.
Yeah.
You kind of have to have a ground game now.
And it's better for self-defense than people realize, in the sense that you need to be able to escape being on the ground. And if you don't spend any time on the ground, you won't know how to do that. I'm certainly not advocating pulling guard in a street fight, but you need to be able to get out when somebody has you pinned. And in many cases,
Certainly.
you can pin another person, so to put somebody down on the ground and be able to hold them down is very valuable in self-defense context.
Right. So, Jamie, did you want to have me include your jiu-jitsu school information? I was going to have your Patreon link in the description for this episode on YouTube. Did you want your in-person classes for Brazilian jiu-jitsu out there too?
No, you could just leave it at the Patreon. That's fine.
Okay.
I mean, we have plenty of in-person students.
All right. Yeah, Brazilian jiu-jitsu is popular. The Chinese stuff, not so
I don't
much.
have any dearth of in-person students, to be honest. So
Okay.
if people are interested and they want to check out what I'm doing jiu-jitsu wise, it's all on the Patreon anyway, so they can get on there and look at whatever moves I'm developing.
Great. So I would like to take a moment to thank one of our previous guests. He sent me this beautiful. Sorry, I gotta move it this way. This beautiful golden dragon print from the museum that he visited in Ireland. This is from Harry Minogue. So I wanted to take a moment and thank him for that, just so everybody would know. A really generous guy. Harry Minogue is out there doing very similar work to you. He's making things very accessible out in Ireland, though. So,
very cool.
I really appreciate your time today, Jamie, and I hope to sit down and chat with you again about Buddhism and Kung Fu and Jiu-Jitsu. I really enjoyed our talk, and I really wanted to thank you. And
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Is there anything you wanted to mention before we sign off? Anything coming up?
No, nothing in particular, but just really enjoyed being here, and thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. And, again, I'll keep an eye out for what you put out there on social media, everybody. Jamie Nottingham, he's awesome. I think we need more people like you, sir.
Thanks.
Have a great one.
You as well.
Bye.